Mixed martial arts. No one else talks about it. Except us. On the ball.
Dublin City FM.
Hello everybody and welcome to this week's edition of MMA on Dublin City FM, part of On the Ball. And I'm joined by Kenny Murphy on the line. We're going to talk all this week's news in mixed martial arts from around the globe. How you doing, Ken?
I'm alright, Neil. What a gorgeous piece of music that was, eh?
You know, it kind of got me in the mood for talking about people going to war. I don't know if that was the intention, but fair play to Declan for picking that song right before our segment.
Absolutely, yeah.
We have some great music coming up later. An old Dublin band called Easy Tiger being played on the show today, and I have nothing to do with that.
Old Dublin.
Oh, we've been on. Amazing. So there you go. Get them IMRO royalties in. Anyway, Ken, how are you?
I'm alright, Neil. Yourself?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Okay, so let's start off by talking about an injury that was suffered at the hands of Chris Cyborg. It was a full rupture of the anterior tibia ligament in her ankle, which will require significant recovery time. So this was an announcement made by Invicta yesterday. The obvious ramifications of this is a potential fight earmarked for Ronda Rousey sometime in 2015. So This is a pretty big deal. It looked like Cyborg, she'd gotten to the right weight. She was making her efforts. It was almost like an unsaid agreement that she was going to come over at some stage. So without Cyborg on the cards, we'll talk about Ronda's fight that was actually, the date was given this week. But without Cyborg on the cards, what do you do with Ronda in 2015 if she is in fact to beat Katsungano?
Well, you've got the cat fight, which is basically at the beginning of March, and then she's probably only going to be fighting twice a year nowadays, I would think, with her kind of Hollywood opportunities and that kind of opening up. So I would think then you could do the Betch Kohea fight if she keeps winning, maybe in the second half of the year, or you could revisit the negotiations with Gina Carano, although I don't know if the UFC are very keen to do that right now, but that division, the problem with that division is it's Ronda, then everybody else. I mean, you could maybe say Kat is second in the division, but
yeah,
I don't even know. She's such a question mark. She's had that one win since kind of an 18-month layoff, and I don't want to say it was lucky, but she was kind of lucky there. So, so I'm not really sure what you would do. So someone could break from the pack, but at the moment you look at everybody in there, Sarah McMahon, Sarah Kaufman, Liz Carmouche, Misha Tate, they're all people that Ronda's beaten once or twice already. So I could maybe see Sarah Kaufman, if she can win a couple of fights, getting back in there with Ronda.
Yeah, in regards to Gina Carano, I'd feel like maybe they feel it might be one of the only options they have next year. I think that Cyborg being out might force their hand a little on this. Obviously, negotiations... Go ahead.
The problem is that they're not dealing with fight management. They're dealing with her Hollywood agents, and there's just the talk from within the UFC is that it's just an impossible deal to make, because they could be kind of leveraging the offer they're getting from the UFC to kind of weigh it against the offer she has to do movies and say, well, look, the UFC are going to pay her this much to fight, you need to pay us this much for her to do a movie. You know what I mean? You don't know what's really going on if she's just a pawn. I mean, we've heard that that Bellator were interested, so she may not have any interest in fighting. And she did say in an interview earlier this year that if the Ronda fight didn't happen in this year, which obviously it isn't now, that she would probably never fight again. So I don't believe at the moment. I don't believe that we'll ever see Gina Carano back in the cage.
Speaking of women's mixed martial arts, we'll stick with something that has a lot of homebound interest, that being Aisling Daly in Tough 20. She's had her first fight in the televised fight against Angela Mangala, and she won. And she's doing great, and she's getting a lot of pub, It's part of this Irish takeover thing anyway. We have people like McGregor always tweeting about her. Dana White had a private meeting with her this week. Now, obviously, a lot of the season has already been finished, so I don't know
Well, it is finished, yeah.
So I don't exactly know what that meeting could have been about, but there seems to be good interest.
If she'd gotten to the final and she was going to fight for the title next month, I feel like we would know.
Yes.
The Irish mixed martial arts community is very small, and news like that would probably have filtered out.
Well, interestingly enough, one would presume that she does have a future in UFC, no matter how her season in Tough 20.
Seems that way. All right.
Yeah, it's kind of the perfect storm, you know. Just if they needed one more thing to complement the Irish influx, it would be a female fighter. You know,
Yeah.
it really works. It really works well as a kind of an Irish stable you could have. But she obviously victorious this week, and we've people like Brian Stan as well. A lot of the pundits talking her up. Do you feel that she could have a good run in that division?
I think because it's such a muddy division, we've just discussed how kind of everyone is. There's a lot of fighters just in the middle there. There's no clear kind of hierarchy. It's almost like, you know, if you're a football fan, you watch the Premier League at the moment. There's Chelsea, and then there's just everybody else, and that's kind of the way it is. So, you know, it's entirely possible Aisling could win some fights and Aisling could lose some fights. But I suppose the advantage to it being so muddled and Ronda having worked her way through so many fighters is that, you know, if she does put an even small run together, there's every chance she could make a run.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about some upcoming fights over the next few weeks. Before we get to UFC, I'd be remiss if I didn't remind everybody, and, you know, obviously the angle they shot in the cage is enough that people are surely thinking about this fight every single waking moment. But Stephan Bonnar and Tito Ortiz is taking place on November 15th. It's going to be on Spike TV for free over in the States. So, are you in any way excited about this fight? Can you see them doing something else wacky in the upcoming days to build it up more? And who do you see being the victor?
The victor?
The victor.
Well, the fans of the victors, Neil, here. No question about that. Am I excited? I don't know. I don't want to say I'm excited, but I'll certainly watch the fight. I think whenever you have two, you know, superstar names, which I think Stephan Bonnar may be a stretch, but I think you could probably give him that, and then certainly Tito Ortiz, whatever you want to say about him, he's always been a draw. I think when you have two guys, two named fighters getting into the cage together, there's always an appeal. So, you know, I don't take it in any way serious. It's not a top level fight. I don't believe these are two of the top 205 pound fighters in the world, but I'd certainly be interested in seeing who wins. Who's going to win? I mean, Tito's fought more recently, so you think maybe he's favoured, but I just expect it to be a bad slugfest. Maybe Bonnar would have the edge when it comes to speed, but Tito with power. So, you know, it's a coin flip for me. I'll say Tito because he fought more recently, but I have no major conviction either way.
Stephan was busted for PEDs after the Anderson Silva fight.
Yeah, his second time.
Obviously a lot of people are very much thinking the PED trend is going to be switching a lot because UFC and Nevada basically agreeing to crank down very, very heavily on offenders. Does Stephan being in Bellator kind of negate him from this new wave of testing? Do you think that people in Bellator are kind of going to be flying a lot under the radar?
Well, Bellator announced 4 steroid failures from their last show, four drug failures. A few of them were steroids, a few of them were marijuana. So clearly they are doing testing. But it'll be day of show testing. I doubt California is going to be testing Tito and Stephan in the weeks leading up to the fight. So, you know, I mean, it's an even playing field in that sense. I know Bonnar's claim was that he was using steroids to help himself recover when he was helping Dave Bautista train before he got called for the Anderson Silva fight. And, you know, so he didn't think he was going to be competing, and that's why he was using stuff. But, of course, if you remember, it was Drostanolone that he was taking, which is a weight-cutting steroid. So why would he be cutting weight? The only reason he would be cutting weight was if he suddenly had a fight and he needed to get down. So, you know, his excuse didn't really hold much water. So, you know, I don't expect it to be a major factor. I think if one is on it, he'll be on it, or if both are on it, they'll be on it. But it is what it is. It's the fight game, and you know, anybody who likes to kid themselves, these are all clean people. You know, they're probably the same people who thought Lance Armstrong was innocent.
Well, sticking with this, I guess in a way that a Lance Armstrong character in mixed martial arts would be Vitor. He was basically told that he was going to be tested a tremendous amount over since the commissions had him in, and that he was actually going to have to pay for it himself. But since being granted a license, he hasn't actually been tested once.
There's actually been an update to this story.
Okay.
earlier in the week it came out that Nevada had not tested him in the 4 months since that meeting. And now the fight was being moved to California, and California announced they would be testing but hadn't done so either.
Yes.
So I guess Nevada, sensitive to the criticism that they were receiving, then decided to test him, which they did, I believe it was yesterday.
Oh.
So that's something that we'll hear the results of in the coming weeks. I think he'll be clean, just because I just don't see how you would take the risk at this point, because, I mean, I think he has to know that if he did take the risk, he could be in the same situation as Wanderlei Silva or Chael Sonnen, which is where your career is basically over. And this is it for him. I think this championship match is his last huge fight of his career. So I think, if nothing else, he just needs to get there and make his payday out of it, you know?
Yeah, no, I guess that's pretty fair. Cain Velasquez had surgery. We talked about it last week, just the fact that...
And it's more severe than they thought, by the way.
That's right. So he's going to be, I think, in a brace for close to 2 months. So when do you think that we're going... Do you think he'll still be on schedule for his match against...
No, I think we're looking at April, May next year.
Okay.
And I think I have to say this... it's not something that's popular in the MMA world, and you say this stuff, but I think at this point you just strip him of the championship. I just don't think, if it's... I do think that they should put in a kind of a 1 year rule, but if a fighter is missing for a year, but on the year mark, he does have a fight lined up for 2 or 3 months down the line, and that's fine. But if a fighter is out for a year and they're still out and you don't know when they're coming back for sure, then at that point, I think you just have to take action and move on. And I think you need to make the Verdum fight for the championship, because, it's not fair for all these fighters to be fighting for essentially nothing, because you've got a champion who, like I said last week, he's fought Bigfoot Silva and Junior Dos Santos since 2010. That's it. So everybody else in that division, you know what I mean? No,
I completely agree. It'd be an amazing scenario that we could go into 2015 with Mark Hunt as our official heavyweight champion of the world.
That would be interesting, yeah.
Very interesting. Last week we spoke about one of the double headers coming up next Saturday night. We spoke about the Luke Rockhold and Michael Bisping fight that's taking place in Australia. We also have on Saturday night... Go ahead.
We've got Ross Pearson and Ally Quinta in the semi-main on that fight. And I find it interesting. This is not the first time they've stacked the Australian cards with British fighters. Which... It's kind of, I don't know if it's a Commonwealth thing or what it is, but people remember Ross Pearson coached against George Soteropoulos on the Smashes, the Ultimate Fighter, and was obviously very unpopular with the Australians because of that. And so I don't really understand the logic of putting two very unpopular Brits at the top of this card, but evidently they've probably sold their tickets, so they're happy enough. And that's a tough fight for Ross against Ally Quinta. Ally Quinta, for people who don't know, he's a tough out. He's one of Chris Weidman's training partners. He lost his last fight, he got caught, but before then did look good. He's got good wrestling, and it could be a tough fight for Pearson. But at the same time, I don't think Ally Quinta has ever fought somebody with quite the striking of Ross, the real deal Pearson. So that's a real good fight. That's a fun fight there. And then obviously you've got the other show going on a couple hours later in Brazil with Shogun and OSP.
So yeah, moving on to that fight, that's going to take place in Brazil again. That's literally 2 shows in 3 weeks down there. How do you see Shogun doing? For me, Shogun, it's odd. I remember when we started covering mixed martial arts, he really was just a premier light heavyweight, and
he was the champion, in fact.
Yeah,
when we started.
And it's just kind of where do you see him at now? Yeah.
I think he'll lose this fight. I think that Jimmy Manuwa would have been, kind of ideal. He would have just struck with him. But I see OSP kind of has a more well-rounded game, and I just want to see Shogun. He has no gas. He always gasses out, and he's slowing down. And it's not your age; it's the miles you have on the clock. And Shogun is I think is my age, or maybe a year older. I mean, it's maybe 31, but he's against. I always remember the Dan Henderson fight where they both looked like fighters who were just way past their best, and I struggle to back him anymore, and especially when he lost to Chael Sonnen so convincingly, so quickly. What can you say? Chael, didn't look great in his next fight or his fight beforehand.
And if anything, that Dan Henderson fight was probably one that shortened the career of both men, kind of like Hell in a Cell.
Yeah, very similar to Hell in a Cell, yeah.
Okay, just 2 quick notes before we finish. Has Kung Lee got his apology yet?
I don't think so, unfortunately. I think you'd be waiting. But that situation could turn ugly, and I like we discussed last week, he failed the eye test. However, he didn't really fail the test, and I think the UFC probably should just apologise. They
kind of have to, I think. I don't know. And then finally, we touched on it earlier when we spoke about Ronda Rousey and Kat Zingano. It's been announced for the Turn of the Year show in Las Vegas, headlined by John Jones and Daniel Cormier. That is a stacked card. It's as stacked as we're going to expect, in this current climate. How well do you see that show doing?
You got to see how it goes the last week, but if they can do kind of 600, 700, I think they would be happy enough with that.
Is there any way that it can gain the momentum it would have had if the original schedule, John Jones, Daniel Cormier, had happened after the pull apart? Or the brawl?
Can, but you just don't know. I mean, there's got to be something exceptional in that final week, But I just think at the moment, with where they are for pay-per-view all year, they don't have anything in that ballpark. So, I think if you can get something upward of 500,000, I think the July show is the only one who did around that number, then you should be happy,
Okay, well, Ken, it sounds like that you are wanted by the love of your life, your little lady.
Indeed,
so we're going to let you go, and we're going to thank you very much as always for being on. Thanks everybody for listening. If you want to hear, if you missed any of the show and you want to hear the rest of it later on, or you want to get archives of our mixed martial arts segment, you can go to thisaintfake.com, where we also have our pro wrestling podcast. It's completely free. The MMA show usually goes up on Mondays, and This Ain't Fake Brother later on in the week. So thank you very much for listening. We'll be back around the same time here on 103.2 FM.
On the ball.
Dublin City FM.